Hello. So this is Rebecca, and I'm here, and I have the pleasure to be speaking with Alex Stewart. So, Alex, getting started, please introduce yourself.
Good morning, Rebecca. Lovely to see you again. My name's Alex Stewart, and I'm the CEO of H&G Design Group and also Hubbl.
And yeah, I'm sure we first met in financial services. So we'll get on to what you're doing now, but
Yeah.
it would be sort of interesting to know back when you were working in financial services, what was your connection? What were you doing?
So I was in financial services for 20 years. I actually was longer than that because I started as an intern back at Dresner Kleinwort Benson in 97, and I did a year's internship as part of my degree, a sandwich course. So I did a 1 year working, then went back for my finals, and then after my finals I then joined the company again, and I was there for 10 years. So nearly over half of my career was at one company. And I was a stockbroker, so I used to write financial research for institutional investors on UK and European markets. So yeah, it was good. Great fun.
Wow, and that sounds like, well, it was a pretty long time and some interesting roles. So yeah, what was your experience during those years? How did it look and feel?
It
And maybe the,
changed. I
the
mean, it changed a
evolution.
lot over time, as I think you would expect over a period of 20 years. I think the first company I worked for, Dresdner Kleinworts, it was an amazing company to work for. We were big enough to punch with the big guys, but we were also small enough to be almost like a family. And the particular team
Mm.
I was working for the economics and strategy team, and we were like a big family, and we still are actually. And so that's why I think I stayed so long, because we all got on, and we saw over that period just big changes in the industry. It was obviously highly regulated anyway, for the moment I joined, but that regulation just became more and more onerous over time. And we had, obviously, I was there for the tech boom. I was there for the global financial crisis. I was there for various bits and pieces. So yeah, it was Brexit. We touched on earlier. Scottish independence vote. There were lots of ups and downs in the market during my time.
Wow. So yeah, quite a lot of different events, different current affairs, and yeah, quite some changes. So yeah, how you mentioned it already, how you saw the industry evolve, but um, yeah, maybe any other comments to mention some of the current affairs, but just generally some of the trends you saw during that time.
Well, what the big trend in economics, if you like, or in investing, is that we saw a shift away from equities to bonds. And this was a long-term thesis that our team held, was that, in fact, if you're a pension fund investor, you had sort of fixed liabilities that were coming in the future, and the way that the society is getting older and living longer, we're living in this inverted pyramid where there's less people at the bottom of the workforce supporting those at the top, which are retired. So you've got your pension provider. You're faced with this issue where all of your retirees are now living for much longer. You've got to make sure that pool of assets you've collected can pay those people into their retirement. So how do they want to do that? They want to do that with the greatest degree of certainty as they can. And equities are too volatile for them. We've seen huge, as I mentioned earlier, we've seen the tech boom and bust. We saw the global financial crisis, all those other events. Equities has the greatest volatility. So we saw this huge switch to fixed income.
Mm.
People were investing in bonds for their longevity and that guaranteed return. So as an equity broker, it was less good. So it felt like for probably the 20 years I was in the industry, we were in this very slow terminal decline as life just got slowly worse year on year, but not really enough to notice year on year. But over a longer piece, you look back and go, wow, it was so much better 5 years ago. But
Yeah.
that was the big evolution, I suppose. Yes, so there were changes in regulation as well. So they came through almost the day I joined the industry, or the month I joined. We had the miners report, which looked at the relationship of how brokers were rewarded and how they charged commissions, and that structure they wanted to change and make more transparent, which was probably a good thing. But the latest version of that was MiFID II, which has been, so you meant to have better outcomes for investors, and those investors are really pension holders. So you and I, that our professional investors, are looking after our money. I don't see the current regulations are actually good for the end investor. We spent, FCA in the UK spent a long time promoting smaller independent brokers to start up and compete against the big banks, and they made it more of a level playing field. However, this regulation has killed them all off. So we've gone back the other way. So you're now getting less research for smaller companies, you're getting less advisors, and there's less competition. So this is only can be a bad thing for the end investor.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Super interesting. And certainly in lots of areas, I think a big uptick in regulation, and just such a topical issue at the moment too.
Yeah, not all of it was bad. Some of it was well positioned and well thought out and well meaning. But I think MiFID II, I mean, you looked at when it was imposed, you sort of got noises from the French regulators, the Germans, the Americans, various other regulators were like, this isn't really a great piece of legislation coming through, but it was pushed forward by the FCA. So now, it'd be interesting to see what happens, because I think there'll be a snapback over a short period of time. You'll see when these negative outcomes start to transpire, will we see it pushed forward, or will we see people slightly rolling back on it and softening all the regulations around it?
Yeah, it would definitely be one to watch, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And sort of final question, sort of thinking back to your time when you were in financial services, what are some of the sort of personal takeaways that you've had, whether it's good or bad or improvements or anything, just an open.
Well, I think really good question. The good things, I think, were the people I met. There's always this sort of, you talk about being, you mentioned who you're an investment banker or stockbroker, they'll have this sort of this view of what people are going to be like, and actually I found that to be completely wrong. That caricature. I met some absolutely brilliant people who I'm still in contact from my first ever job, actually, when I was an intern, and very sadly our team assistant passed away end of last year, and at the funeral there was about 6 or 7 of us from the team of 12, 15 or so at various times, all went along to the funeral. Some hadn't seen some of those guys for 10 years, but it showed how we could pull back together as a family. So I worked with some absolutely fantastic people. Other great experiences were actually, we're just very privileged to meet really great people. I mean, every day the news would come out at 7 o'clock. So all the corporates would be Vodafone or Siemens or whoever it is would announce their news at 7 o'clock in the morning every day. Every day you'd get all this news come out. So there's anticipation before that, and then you've got to try and interpret this news that you didn't know was going to happen. So working with people who are reacting to things they weren't expecting. So it was incredible to be in that atmosphere, in that environment where things are fast moving and changing. So that was a really big, really big experience to be around, just to be around. And then I think probably finally, just to be able, the other privileged position we're in, we actually was meeting some people running these companies. So having, I was at HSBC the last in my career, so we actually would get meetings with the CFO. He would come down and talk to us about how he was running the company. Would meet the senior management at Vodafone or BP or some smaller companies, could be Compass or Bet or Bunzl, and actually speaking to these guys of how they've set the company up, various departments, markets they want to operate in, or geographies or sectors, and actually seeing that play out. They'd come back a year later. Has it worked? How's it worked? Which areas worked well for them, which didn't work so well? That was fascinating. Getting that exposure to the heads of businesses and some of the most, intelligent and entrepreneurial people running large companies and actually seeing the effects of what they do to grow profits, grow employment. These are things that push the economy forward. So that's probably one of the things I miss the most, actually, is actually having that one-on-one time. Not one-on-one, sorry. There was one of them, there may have been 10 of us, but all getting to ask these guys questions and talk to them about how they're running their businesses.
Yeah, thank you. And I can certainly share some of that. I think I sort of met some great people, and yourself included, when we were working together. And also, I think having that morning meeting or that morning reflection on the news, even now, it's sort of the first thing I do often in the morning, to go and have a look and see. I think old habits die hard.
They do. Even this morning, I think actually BBC were trying to race to get some reactions to some news, and I could tell straight away that their reaction was wrong. They'd gone down the wrong path. And these were the great things that when we were talk to our clients, we'd have our view, and you'd ring up the clients, and if the news was boring, not interesting, no one would pick up. When they didn't know what was going to happen, they'd pick up on the first ring.
Yeah.
So you knew when you had something, then they needed you. They needed advice. They needed to know what was going on. So yeah, you're right. I still get that. Occasionally get that buzz in the morning while listening to the news.
Yeah, for sure. And well, thank you so much for the reflections. But now, yeah, turning to what you're up to now.
Yes.
So it would be brilliant. I'm really curious. What are you doing? What's the organisation?
Yeah, so it's slightly different. So H&G Design Group is an interior design business, but we specialise in design for operational real estate assets. What does that mean? So our clients tend to be funds or operators. So it could be an investment fund that has bought a block of apartments, and they want to rent those out fully furnished in the long term, and they take that income to pay their pension holders. So we come in as a business and we help them at a very early stage. So we may look at the mix of apartments if we're early enough. So they may be pre-planning or the early planning stages. So we'll give them advice on saying how many 1 beds versus 2 beds versus 3 beds. So look at the local market. We help them with branding. So how is this building going to be positioned in the marketplace? And then we get on to the actual practicalities of how is each unit going to flow. So where is the front door going to be? The kitchen, most modern apartments, as you'll know, you'll have a open plan kitchen, diner, lounge. So, but how is it actually going to flow? Where is the washing machine going to sit in that construct? Because in some places you might walk in and trip over. So getting all those things right, and then looking at the bedrooms and the storage space is really key for renters. Key for most people actually living, but for renting it's really key. So looking at where the internal walls are going to be and that sort of thing. So we do all that side, and then eventually we design the furniture itself, then we procure it, and then we install it. So we take that whole piece for an investor. And the living sector is our biggest sector we operate in. So living includes mainstream build to rent, also includes student, senior living, service departments, and hotels. But as well as that, we also operate other sectors. We work in hospitality, so that would be restaurants. Commercial, where we do some office space as well. And also we've done some retail as well.
Wow, my goodness. And this feels like quite a change, I have to say. It's not an area I know much about at all.
It's quite a big change. Fortunately, for everybody involved, I don't actually do any of the design work.
Okay.
Otherwise, our business wouldn't last very long. I came in to run the business. So the business was operating in Dublin for, I think it's founded in 2005. I invested in the company in about 2018 while I was at HSBC, actually. It's a lot while I was still working in financial services. When I got made redundant in end of 2019, I decided that I was going to leave banking altogether. I wanted to do something new. And I was approached by the company to join them, but to launch a UK business for them. So I set up in May 2020, the height of COVID. I started a design business in the UK with myself and one other. Obviously, we were UK subsidiary of the main business, and yeah, that's how I started. So it was quite good fun. It was interesting to be able to draw on some of those experiences I had in financial services. So meeting the CEO of Phoenix, who I knew really well, and how he had an outsource model. So he had quite a small team, but through his outsource relationships, he could scale the business very quickly. In good times, and in bad times, he could cut it down as well very quickly. So his cost base was very small. So I saw this and I thought, this is really an attractive model. We don't need to have a big warehouse with lots of people. What we need to have is other people's warehouses where we can borrow on a short period of time. So that's how I've set the UK business up. And that's how we operate now. And it's been really successful. So we've got a lot of outsourced partners we work really closely with. And they are really, we share email addresses. We've got various chat groups. We are it's hand in glove. We work really closely together. And because this is a new growing sector, the people we use, they weren't exposed to it at all before. So for them, they're seeing this as a completely new sector for them to move into and grow their business with us. So it's been fantastic.
Yeah, that sounds good. And yeah, sort of a tricky time, I can only imagine as well. May 2020, I moved out of financial services in March 2020. So
Right.
it was, big sort of pivot time, I think, for lots of people. Are there any other reflections from your experience being in financial services that you use today?
But the main thing I use actually, so my final role at HSBC, is how we met actually. I was running the ESG sales team for Europe for HSBC and the specialist sales. So I've used, when I joined, the majority of our clients are asset managers. So when they send a request for pitch, an RFP comes to us, that will contain information about the asset and what we need to provide back in our proposal, but it'll also have things about sustainability and ESG. And we hadn't seen it formally when I first joined, but we've been asked questions about it. And we talked about it internally, and I said, there's a direction of travel here, because in equities and bonds, ESG is now mandatory. And I said, I don't think it's really come in yet, and these guys aren't considering it. So we pushed quite hard on sustainability, also the E part of ES&G, and it's been worked really well for us because the direction of travel has been as we forecasted. It's got, and every RFP we receive now has got quite a large section of how we have to prove where the furniture's come from, how sustainable it is, what carbon emissions will be associated with this program, so transporting it, putting it into the building, and how transparent we can be as well to help the company. So we would become their scope 3 emissions. So they need to know what can we provide them back to help them on that front, which we keep all that data. So we record, for example, we know how heavy a shipment is. So if it's on a truck, we can then calculate. These aren't precise calculations, but they're pretty good estimates of how much we know the distance that the lorry traveled. We know how heavy the cargo was. Therefore, we can work out actually roughly how much carbon was emitted or produced from that shipment being transferred. The same if we flew it across from Asia to the UK, or it was on a ship that went to Rotterdam then fed across. We can work that out for them, and we offer that as part of our service. So that's been really helpful. So using that ESG knowledge. So and my old sometimes do quote my ex-colleagues Ashim and Laurie Fitzjohn Sykes in my meetings. It's been really good actually. I think the key thing for them, from our clients in the ESG space now, is that, and with most people, it's quite daunting, and it's a bit of a cliff edge, and they're not really sure what to do. And I advise the same thing as I did when I was in stockbroking, is we say that you need to choose your battles, and try and win them. So even if you start off with one piece of furniture in your apartment that is sustainable, then you've made a step in the right direction. Next year, it might be 2 pieces, and it might be 3 the year after, and then so on and so on. And eventually, the whole pack could be completely sustainable. Looking not just in how it's produced, but also looking at the circular economy. What is going to happen to these pieces of furniture in 5 to 7 years' time when they need to be replaced? So we look at where they're the most obvious wins. We look at the big items in an apartment. The beds and mattresses and the sofas are the biggest items. So if we get those right now, they're the meaningful gains that you can have. So bringing this sort of step-by-step approach to sustainability has helped some of our investors make sense of what they want to achieve. Because otherwise they look at it and think, oh my God, there's all these big things we need to do. We're so far behind. Well, the only way to catch up is to take small steps. And then eventually you get closer and closer, and then you actually start to make a difference, and then it becomes easier.
Yeah, wow, that's so interesting. And I hadn't thought about that application of ESG, but in the area now that you're working in,
Yeah.
it makes complete sense. And I think you're right, it can feel quite overwhelming. So just sort of breaking down those pieces, what's the most relevant, doing it better and building upon that
That's right.
makes a lot of sense.
Where our clients struggle, I don't think that people will pay a premium, the renters will pay a premium if you advertised a sustainable pack. I'm going to kill that call. Sorry. Will they pay a premium for that? I don't think it's there yet. It may never be there, but it may become the minimum standard. That's the most likely outcome.
Yes.
So, and that if it attracts more people, so you lease up faster, then that is a type of monetary gain. And if those renters then join your building and then they stay a little bit longer because they like the ethos of sustainable, then that's better as well, because every time a tenancy changes, there's costs associated to it. It may be a few £100 every time you change, but if someone every year it keeps rotating. But if someone stayed for 18 months and the next person stayed for 2 years, you've suddenly got a lot less cost over that period than you had if it changed more frequently. So I think that's where the gains are going to be. There are a couple of brands out there, especially in the service department world, where everything is sustainable. One of them, I think everything has to come within 25 miles. It has to be produced within 25 miles of the building. I'm not sure it doesn't make economic sense. That particular fund has deeper pockets and a longer horizon. But that's quite extreme. And as I said to you earlier, I think the way to do it is to take these small gains along the way.
Yeah, and I can only imagine it must really depend where you're based as well.
That's true, exactly.
Yeah, easier in some places than others.
Well, yeah, if the building's in, I don't know, Mayfair, you've struggled to get any furniture made within 25 miles.
Exactly.
If it's in Leicester or Manchester, if it's in Manchester, we've got about 5 sofa manufacturers within 25 miles of Manchester Piccadilly, so that would be easy. Yes, exactly. So that's a very good point.
Yeah. Oh wow. Well, thank you. So interesting to hear about what you're doing now, and then also that application of ESG as well. And so, final question. Thinking about what you're doing now, and perhaps sort of also reflecting a little bit, if you could go back and give yourself advice earlier on in your career, what would you say? What advice would you give yourself?
By Amazon, Google, and Apple. A bit of perfect hindsight investing.
Yeah.
Would have been better for. Then I could have retired, and then I could do all these things for fun. Actually, what would I change? I thought the question is, what advice? What would I change? I could have moved companies more often. I could have changed teams to where I could have challenged myself and maybe exposed to a bigger market to earn more money. But actually, I worked in that first 10 years I referenced earlier at Dresden Kleinwaltz was such a good time. They were such good people to work with, and we were successful. I couldn't honestly change any of that at all.
Wow, thank you. Well, thank you so much for your time
My
today.
pleasure.
And yeah, really happy to hear that. Maybe just over to you. Any final remarks? If not, we'll finish up there.
No, I mean, I think changing from financial services, there's a few more grey hairs. It's a bit more stressful running your own business. But if anybody's thinking of doing it, and if you're ultimately not happy in your role, which I think at the end of financial services, that end of that 20 years, I think I'd fallen out of love with the industry, and I feel like a new lease of life. And it's challenging. It has its difficulties, but I wouldn't go back and change now. I'm far happier. It's far more exciting what we're doing, even though it is interior design and people think I plump cushions all day long. But it's been great. And I think my advice to anybody would be, if they're unhappy in their job, whatever sector it's in, and there's a burning passion to do something else. I think for me, I had an entrepreneurial spirit that was being stifled in financial services. I had no burning desire to be in an interior design business, but I knew I wanted to grow something and be a part of an organization. It's probably why I like talking to these CEOs and CFOs we used to meet. So my advice would be, go and do it. Give it a go.
Well, here, I wholeheartedly agree with that. And thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Absolute pleasure, Rebecca. Thank you very much.